Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much, and I'm so glad you've joined us for a story tonight, and what a fabulous story I have for you too. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and by all means, share this story with anybody who enjoys a good story, because as I always say, even if you don't like Bigfoot, I think you're going to enjoy these stories because of the twists and turns along the way. So let's continue with our story, shall we? Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I could see him. He was standing there watching us from the trees. It may have been a dark, tenebrific night, but I had clearly seen his face staring at us. His bright yellow eyes immediately commanded my undivided attention, when a faint whisper of ethereal moonlight unabashedly steered its way through the branches of the trees, and for a brief second it lit up this thing's hideous face, along with its humongous-sized body. But he was there, only for a flicker of what seemed like a second, and then he was gone, as if he'd never been there at all. What the hell was that? I thought to myself, as goosebumps prickled over my flesh. I'd never seen anything so intimidating in all my life. I was wondering if this could be a trick of the light. It had to have been. I couldn't have seen what I thought I'd seen. There was no way. It just wasn't physically possible. It couldn't be. I reminded myself how on a cloudy day you can study the white fluffy clouds high up in the expansive canopy of the powder blue sky. You can see things that aren't really there. I used to love staring up at the clouds with my sister Emma on a plethora of occasions when we were kids. We would lie back on the grass and stare up unblinkingly at the sky. We would point out the blurry faces of strange animals in the cloudy vapour that stared down at us, but none of those images were remotely real. They were just the formation of cloud masses that creates this elusive imagery that dissipates as quickly as it's formed. In the very same breath, during the dark hours of the night, the suggestible, impressive, tenebrific shadows and smouldering reflectant light from the moon can make illusory, fictitious things that aren't even there appear hauntingly real. Let's not kid. Even a tree in the darkness can appear like a gigantic human being. That might be what the huge thing was, I thought. Maybe the yellow eyes had been that of an owl perched on a tree branch. Maybe I had mistaken a tree that I'd seen for being a humanoid monster. But once the moonlight had dissipated from that section of the woods, everything looked harmlessly benign, almost as if nothing had been there at all. I repetitively told myself in my head over and over again that I was being silly. Of course I hadn't seen a monster out there. The alternative didn't bear thinking about. Even if I told my friends what I believed I thought I'd seen, who were splashing around in the dark water of the lake with me, they'd think I'd lost leave of my senses. They would laugh at me, and they'd probably think I was just winding them up in order to scare them. I reminded myself that I was out here at the lake here in the Ozarks, swimming in this beautiful cool water on this camping weekend with my friends, to enjoy myself. This was the last holiday long weekend of the summer, when I would see my friends, before we went our separate ways to college the following year. Regretfully, none of us were going to the same college or university, and the thought of our great big separation, looming on the horizon of our lives like a closed book that had not yet been read, made me extremely sad. I wondered whether we'd drift away from our close friendships we shared together, like ships taking different voyages across the Atlantic. Would we ever cross paths again, I wondered. Of course, we'd told ourselves tirelessly we'd never ever lose touch, as best friends stayed close forever, right? We always called ourselves the Fearsome Four. We had become close as a result of sharing a dormitory together at boarding school. As a consequence, we had become like sisters. Of course, I was close with my real birth sister Emma, who was 3 years my senior, but she had left school 4 years ago, skipping 1 year because she was so bright. Some might say that the four of us were unlikely friends, but somehow our personalities seemed to complement each other. Laura Fenningrad was the tallest of us all. She was lanky and slender, with long flaxen golden blonde hair and piercing blue eyes. She inherited her blonde hair and blue eyes from her Scandinavian father. Everyone in the Fenningrad family was tall, with blonde hair and blue eyes. Laura's two handsome brothers were 10 years older than her, and were like blonde skyscrapers, who had young ladies chasing after them wherever they went. Laura had informed me that both of her brothers had been offered modelling contracts by an illustrious male sports magazine, but had refused them, believing that modelling menswear was a naff thing to do. Laura was a quiet and unassuming kind of person. She was more of a listener and a thinker. She rarely ever contributed much to the conversation, but she always had a warm smile on her face and enjoyed a good laugh as much as the very next person. It wasn't that she was shy or anything like that. She just wasn't the greatest communicator, but she was the sweetest, most gentle-natured person you could hope to meet, with a heart of pure gold. I know when she returned home from the school holidays, she'd volunteer at a local animal shelter and quite literally went to the ends of the earth to find homes for abandoned dogs and kittens. Suffice to say, due to her unwavering, gallantly industrial efforts, she had successfully prevented many animals from being euthanized, which was a testament to how genuinely caring she was as a person. Then there was Natalie Malden, who was always making us laugh at any given opportunity. She had always been the class clown, and was the kind of person everybody could not help but love. She didn't care a jot about what anybody thought of her, and that made her even more likeable as far as I was concerned. She was enviably confident and assured, everything I so badly wanted to be and was not. I guess back then I clandestinely hoped that hanging around Natalie Malden for long enough might enable some of her assertiveness to rub off on me, as they do say that you become like the company you keep. People by nature naturally gravitated towards Natalie, especially when they were down in the dumps or low in the spirits, because if anyone could put a smile on your face, it was Natalie. Beyond being a class clown, she was incredibly perceptive and could pick up at once if you were going through a tough time. It was probably because she had a rough time growing up as a child, which had made her extremely sensitive to people's feelings, moods and behaviours. Ostensibly, her father was a drunk, and her mother would work all the hours God sends, returning home later in the evening, so Natalie never got much parental attention, and her father's regular temper tantrums were not healthy for the young girl. This was why I suspect Natalie's mother thought it was best that she sent Natalie to boarding school, so the teachers and matrons could supervise her every need. Natalie could read energy like no one I knew, probably because when her father was in a cranky mood due to being as drunk as a skunk, she would instinctively know when to avoid him, unless she wanted her head bitten off. So I guess from an early age she learnt to discerningly read body language, rather like a blind person could read Braille. She was good at that. One excellent example of Natalie's miraculous ability to read people happened in senior high. One of the girls in our boarding house called Letitia Thomas, who was in the class above us at school, but slept in the dormitory adjacent to ours on exactly the same floor, which she shared with 4 other girls. Letitia was certain she'd failed her exams, and was so petrified about how her parents would react to her bad grades when they received her unfavourable results, that she decided her life was no longer worth living. Natalie had therefore been on high alert when Letitia began to say things like, "My parents are going to kill me if I failed. I know they will. I know I failed. There's no way I can possibly go home. I'll never live this down. My parents will never ever forgive me." Natalie kept a keen, assertive eye on Letitia, sensing all was not well with her. One evening as the boarders were preparing for lights out, Natalie observed that Letitia was acting weird and had become unduly withdrawn. There was a glassy-eyed look to her appearance that Natalie found oddly disturbing. Natalie discreetly followed Letitia into the ladies' bathroom. She told me later that on that occasion her whole heart was filled with a profound sense of disquiet, as she just overwhelmingly knew that Letitia was in a very bad way emotionally. Natalie had nonchalantly entered the bathroom, feigning a desire to brush her teeth at the sink, when she'd already brushed them 15 minutes before. In truth, she was clandestinely watching Letitia's every move through the bathroom mirror. Natalie observed Letitia pulling out a sharp blade from her wash bag. This was a blade capable of doing a great deal of damage. It was clear that Letitia had smuggled this blade into school, and you didn't have to be a rocket scientist to guess what the blade was going to be used for, especially given Letitia's current emotional state, that had recently been as fragile as fine china. For a brief second, Natalie turned around to look at Letitia. Her discerning eyes met Letitia, who at that time was concealing the blade behind her back. For a second Natalie said nothing, but her horrified expression seemed to speak 1,000 words. And then she said, "You can't do it, Letitia. I know you're hiding a blade behind your back. Please give it to me. You don't want to do this. I'm begging you, Letitia, don't do this." She tried in haste to grab the blade from Letitia, but it was no use. Letitia managed to get away. She ran into the toilet cubicle as quickly as she could, slamming the door behind her. With a mighty bang, Natalie was pounding on the cubicle door and begging Letitia to open up. She was crying after her, "Letitia, please don't! I'm begging you, please don't do this! You're crazy! You mustn't do this! Let's talk about this! Nothing can be that bad! I'm sure your parents will forgive you if your exams didn't go well. I promise you it's not the end of the world. You've got so much to live for. Letitia, I'm begging you. Don't do this." "Go away, will you, Natalie?" Letitia cried out indignantly. "You don't have a clue what you're talking about. My parents will kill me if I failed my exam. And I've failed, I know I have. I cannot live with this pressure on me anymore. It's too much. I just can't cope. I think I'm going to explode. I have to do this. You have no way of knowing what it's like to be me. Just go back to the dormitory, please. Pretend you never saw me. I have to do this. Please let me do this." "I'm not going to let you do this, Letitia. Are you mad? I'm not going to let you do this," Natalie cried out, banging furiously on the door and demanding Letitia to let her in. "Please let me in, Letitia. Let me in. Don't do this. I'm begging you." In seconds, Letitia, it would seem, wasted no time in hurriedly slashing her wrists, lest Natalie would succeed in stopping her from achieving her goal. As I suspect, she realized that Natalie imposed a threat to her plan. Letitia wanted out and was absolutely determined to kill herself, and nobody was going to stop her. But it would seem Letitia had underestimated how determined Natalie was to save her. Natalie broke down the store door by giving it some powerfully hard kicks. It burst open. She found Letitia sitting there on the toilet seat, wrists badly slashed. Blood was sprinkled absolutely everywhere, like red paint on a white contemporary artist's canvas. It was on the toilet floor, on the walls of the store. It looked grotesquely sinister, like something out of a macabre horror movie, or your very worst, most treacherous and terrifying nightmare that you would never wish to entertain in real life. It was enough to make you want to pass out on the spot from the grim reality of such a dreadful scene. But Natalie held it together. She knew if she didn't stop the bleeding at once, Letitia would surely die. She was losing blood quickly from the very deep cuts to her wrist, and growing weak very fast. She flopped over the toilet seat like a rag doll, her face white and waxy, her body growing cold. Natalie managed to rip off her pajama top in record time. She tore it into strips, carefully binding the material over Letitia's wrists to stem the blood flow. She wasted no time in notifying the matron, Miss Greenwich, who was on duty, and Miss Greenwich thankfully called the emergency services. At this point, Letitia was thankfully too weak to put up any fight or any resistance, so to speak. She had lost far too much blood. There was no fight left in her, and her energy was draining away like the last remaining water in a bathtub. The matron, Miss Greenwich, was mortified to see what Letitia had done to herself, and all she could say was, "Why, Letitia? Why would you do this to yourself, love? I don't understand. You've got so much to live for." Letitia whimpered, "No, I don't. I failed my exams." Natalie managed to make jokes in this very sombre, gloomy moment, which was so typical of her. She even tried to keep Letitia alert. And against all the odds, Letitia did manage a half-hearted smile before she finally pegged out and was taken away in the ambulance to receive immediate medical attention in order to save her life. There is no doubt the emergency services were extremely impressed with Natalie's courage, and I think no one at school was in any doubt that Natalie had definitely saved Letitia's life. So everybody unequivocally believed not only was she the class clown, but also a hero. She was the kind of person you would definitely choose to be with you if you were stranded on a desert island. She was resilient, headstrong and determined, and could keep things together in difficult, tumultuous times. And most of all, she could boost your morale. Luckily, Letitia made a full recovery, and Letitia's parents thought that Natalie was a hero. Indeed, Letitia's parents were so very grateful to her, they actually brought Natalie a white BMW, which she'd be able to drive once she got her driver's license. But Natalie was thrilled with the gift. I mean, who wouldn't be? Letitia's parents were thankfully never hard on their daughter again about her exam results, as they quickly realised that putting undue pressure on their daughter was counterproductive and had nearly cost them her life. The irony of ironies is Letitia never failed the exam she thought she had failed. She had been so worried about it. On the contrary, it appeared that she got reasonably good grades, so she would have taken her life for no reason at all. There was no doubt that Natalie saved Letitia's life, so she wasn't only funny, she was intuitive, and who wouldn't want a friend like that watching your back? Then, of course, there was Claudia Salazar, who, much like Natalie, didn't come from a good family. It would seem both her parents were big drug users, and so Claudia was sent to live with her mother's sister, a woman she called Aunt Eva. I was to learn that Aunt Eva was unmarried and worked exclusively full-time at 2 jobs in order to give Claudia a good quality of life, so Claudia would want for nothing, so that woman was an absolute Trojan. It was the demands of her full-time job that had meant that Aunt Eva had promptly decided that it was for the best thing to send Claudia to boarding school, as she couldn't be there for her niece full-time. I guess she was rather worried that if Claudia were unsupervised, she could get herself into all kinds of trouble. Claudia was very close to Aunt Eva and considered her to be the maternal figure in her life. She barely ever knew her own parents, as she had lived with Aunt Eva since she was a toddler, when social services had given Eva full custody of her niece. Claudia's parents had never once expressed any interest in their daughter, as all they cared about was their next fix. So in fact her life story was quite a tragic one. One day at boarding school, Claudia was informed by the headmistress that her mother had died of a drug overdose, and that her father was so desperately sick he was now living on borrowed time, as his liver had completely packed up due to bad cirrhosis. When Claudia learnt the devastating, rather lamentable news, she barely batted an eyelid, claiming very matter-of-factly that her parents had never been there for her, and she'd barely known them. The truth is she never shed so much as a tear for them, because they meant so little to her. Claudia was without question the brightest out of the 4 of us. She was the type of person that annoyingly got straight A's in everything, without even really trying to apply herself. But despite her obvious brilliance, there was a mischievous, rebellious side to her character, which meant she was eager to bend the rules at any given opportunity, and often actively encouraged it. There were many occasions she had persuaded the fearsome 4 to sneak into the main kitchen at the school and raid the pantry there. We'd find a half-open window and would crawl right through it, where we would land on the countertop, and then we would sneakily make our way to the pantry, which was a treasure trove of delicious opportunities waiting to be devoured by hungry boarders. If you've ever been a boarder, you will fully understand the importance of food, and when we raided that pantry, we would return back to the dormitory with the enticing, wicked, decadent fruits of our sneaky labours, which would include tins of condensed milk, packets of marshmallows, cookies, peanut butter, and sometimes even doughnuts or apple crumble bars, which were the very best, and when we found those, it felt like we'd died and gone to heaven quite literally. So many times during the summer terms of the dead of night, we would slip out of the school dormitory and quickly make our way down the staircase, over the locked-railed fence, which we would climb over, and trek all the way to the school swimming pool that was tucked at the far end of the school building, in a private sequestered space opposite the school changing rooms that were always locked at night. It was here, under the still canopy of darkness, with the sky bursting with a treasure trove of bling, against the pretty trillful chorus of crickets and frogs, we would thoroughly enjoy a sneaky dip in the swimming pool. I think we did it for the thrill rather than for anything else, and it's amazing that we never got caught, although on one occasion we very nearly did, when the matron, Miss Greenwich, a stout, no-nonsense, lovable character in her early 60s, very nearly tripped over a sopping wet swimming costume lying in the middle of our dormitory floor that Natalie had disregarded and forgotten to put away. She could be a tad sloppy like that. She'd be the kind of burglar that broke into your house and left her calling card behind, detailing her name and address for you. That kind of burglar. Miss Greenwich had looked down at the swimming costume, with a perplexed, rather confounded look on her heavily powdered face, and said, "What on earth is a swimming costume doing here, in the middle of the floor like this?" We never kept our swimming costumes in our dormitories, with the exception of the fearsome four, of course, who discreetly hid their swimming costumes and towels in their closets in order to enjoy the occasional secret midnight swim. It was Natalie's swimming costume, and thankfully the matron, Miss Greenwich, had a soft spot for her. Natalie could do no wrong in Miss Greenwich's eyes. Natalie gave Miss Greenwich a charming smile, capable of melting the hardest of hearts. Natalie made a puzzled face, as if she found the conundrum of her wet swimming costume lying in the middle of the dormitory floor equally as bewildering as the matron did. "That is so weird, Miss Greenwich, it really is," she said, exaggerating how puzzled she was about this. "I can't understand, for the life of me, why my swimming costume is sopping wet in the first place, and what it's doing here on the dormitory floor of all things, when it should be in the changing room by the swimming pool. How did it get here? I can't imagine. Someone must be playing a joke on me, Miss Greenwich. But I'm not laughing, are you? I mean, you nearly slipped over this thing," she said, bending over to retrieve the offending item. "Well, if this is somebody's idea of a joke, much like you, Natalie, I fail to find it amusing. Especially since I very nearly lost my footing. I could have badly twisted my ankle, you know, if I didn't happen to have such excellent deportment. See to it, Natalie, that from now on you always leave your swimming costume in the changing room. Don't bring your swimming costume into the boarding house. Is that understood?" "Yes, perfectly, Miss Greenwich," Natalie had said. And that had been that. Whether Miss Greenwich knew what the four of us were really getting up to, I do not know. I suspect the sopping wet swimming costume was a dead giveaway. That probably left Miss Greenwich in no uncertain doubt that the four of us were getting up to all kinds of mischief behind her back. Then there was me, little old me. I don't really know how I would actually describe myself. I'm pretty ordinary, really. Nothing special to write home about. Back in those days, I had unremarkable, straight brown bobbed hair, cinnamon-coloured eyes, and a skinny body that never gained any weight in those early years, no matter how much stodge I consumed, of which there was an awful lot at boarding school. Much like my friends, I thoroughly enjoyed having fun, and was very happy to stretch the boundaries when it came to the school rules, because as far as I was concerned, rules were meant to be broken. I enjoyed being controversial, and was a keen and eager debater. I was very good at getting people to see things from a completely different perspective. I'm glad that our school positively encouraged different opinions on things. We were motivated to think outside of the box. Let's say our teachers did not ram down any progressive ideologies down our throats, as is often seen in universities and schools today, which is very sad, as people should learn to develop their own opinions on things and not be influenced so easily by others. So yes, the four of us got on famously, but I had a sinking feeling that this may be the last time we would enjoy ourselves together here in the Ozarks. The following year was not very far away, and by then we would very sadly part ways, when we were ferried away to different colleges or universities to begin a new uncharted journey in our lives. Knowing all this invariably made me feel so very down in the dumps, but I didn't allow such negative emotions to spoil the good time that lay stretched out before us on this camping trip, like a pirate's treasure map waiting to be explored. The truth was, I only had to have a look at my mother's life to have full confirmation of the fears I harnessed. My mother had two best friends when she was at school, Cynthia Logan and Carla Jennings, and after my mother went to university, they parted ways and never ever saw each other again. They swore they would keep faithfully in touch, but they never did. It's amazing how your everyday life can take over, and the past that you leave behind soon gets quickly forgotten about, like a holiday you went on years ago, and when you look back on that vacation, your memory can be ambiguously vague at the very best of times. My mother connected with Carla on Facebook once, but she realized she had nothing in common with her old friend anymore, and so the friendship fell apart before it even had an opportunity to be renewed. It would appear that Carla had changed in leaps and bounds, and was barely recognizable to my mother as her old friend. The woman had married a woman, and had subsequently adopted 3 children from China. She had become a car mechanic, and could only talk about engines. My mother had about as much interest in car engines as a ballerina would have in wearing a pair of combat boots during a ballet audition, so they now had nothing in common. Then when it came to my mother's other good friend, Cynthia, she was unable to locate the woman's whereabouts, for she did not know the married name of Cynthia, and gathered that the woman had moved to Australia, and she had no way of knowing whether this was true or not. My mother warned me that this could happen to me, and that my friendships from the past with the fearsome 4 might fall apart when our lives took on different paths. "I'm afraid, sweetheart, it's the way of the world," she told me in no uncertain terms. "Your friends are all going to go to different colleges or universities. I hate to say this, love, but it's likely you will lose touch with them. Even if you do remain in touch, at some stage you might find you have nothing in common. When I found out that Carla had married a woman and was a car mechanic, I couldn't believe it. She had been nothing like that when I was at school. She'd always been what I would have thought was a girly girl, and now she looks like she's become a strapping woman. So you have to prepare yourself that people can change dramatically. When I look at Carla's picture today, with her short cropped hair and tattoos, I barely recognize the pretty girl I used to hang around with at school. People change, love. It's a scary truth you may have to one day fully entertain." "That's not going to happen to the fearsome 4, I said insistently. But as defensive as I was, I knew deep down in my gut that my mother was right. "Look, love, I do hope for your sake the fearsome 4 stay the very best of friends forever and ever. And maybe you will. Stranger things have happened. But somehow I doubt it, based on my own experiences of the past. Maybe I just drew the short straw. I don't know. For your sake, I hope I'm proved wrong about this." "I hope you are wrong, Mum. I'd loathe to lose touch with the fearsome 4. I couldn't imagine anything worse. I don't think I'll ever find friends as good as these. I just wish we weren't all going to different colleges and universities so far apart. It's such a dreadful bummer. The lake was so beautiful that night at the Ozarks. I loved being in this prepossessing part of the world that I'd always dreamed and longed to visit. And now I was finally here with my 3 best friends, swimming in this mesmerizing body of water. The moon magnanimously cast her silvery prisms of light across its surface. We weren't supposed to be out here swimming in the lake, but doing something forbidden was all the more exciting for us. We had been told very strictly by Mrs. Cooper and Matron Greenwich that no one under any circumstances must leave their tents during the night on this camping trip, unless they needed to answer a call of nature. If they needed anything else during the night, they were required to go straight to the adult's tent. I was very glad that Miss Greenwich, the school matron, was on this trip with us and supervising everything, as she was by nature an efficient, orderly woman. Miss Greenwich had never been married, was quite a buxom woman with pillowy breasts that many a young girl had cried into when they'd received sad news from home. Miss Greenwich always smelt of powder and lavender body wash. She had such a good heart on her, and at the same time a no-nonsense disposition. I think over the years, like many of the boarders in our school, I had grown extremely fond of the woman, for she fulfilled the quintessential role of being the maternal figure in our lives, offering us support and encouragement when our parents could not be there for us. Miss Greenwich, like the vast majority of the girls in my year, had never ever been to the Ozarks before, so she was extremely excited about supervising this trip for us, and especially for those of us in our final year. So in a manner of speaking, the trip was a celebration of the years we'd spent in the boarding house together. So there we are. That is the end of part 1 of our story. Part 2 is tomorrow night, and I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye, good night.